Rabbi Julie Saxe-Taller served as rabbi at Congregation Cherith Israel from 2004 to 2017, and she is also the former senior organizer for the Forum Movement's Religious Action Center. And I'll share that she's been a wonderful colleague to me and very supportive of me as I've taken on this role here at Cherith Israel. And I'm very excited to hear her teaching tonight on the important issue of anti-Semitism and how we can respond to it.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Wow. Let's see. It's so good to be back here. Rabbi Graf called and, well, she said, could you give a drash either about anti-Semitism or cleaning for Passover? So get ready, blow torches, oven cleaning, what to do with that challah that's still in your freezer. Are you ready? Oh, I saw a no. Oh, okay then. Anti-Semitism it is. Hard to do it in a drash. And yeah, it's Shabbat. And we come here to tap into our community, to tap into our spiritual resources. So what I won't do tonight is read you the 14 articles in the J about anti-Semitism in the Bay Area, or the 4 more from the Atlantic about anti-Semitism in the country and in the world, or share with you how we can try to think about when and whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism and when it isn't. But I do actually look forward to delving into all of those things with you in a series of workshops that I'll get to do here with you in May, 3 Wednesday nights in May. So I really look forward to that. But tonight, I want to share a couple of stories, think about what anti-Semitism is, and a bit about what we can do. So I'm so happy you've already talked about the Baal Shem Tov, because what I want to do first is to tell a story written down by the Israeli author Shai Agnon, but a story of the Baal Shem Tov. So in this story, the Besht was called by heaven to teach his disciples about the midah, or the quality of faith. So he took a group of his disciples and they went traveling and they came to a village in Poland. And, I should step back. The Baal Shem Tov is the founder of Hasidism, 18th century. So he and his followers, they arrive at an inn. They meet the innkeeper, who is also the tax collector, which is common for not only characters in his stories, but was actually common. And they are welcomed warmly, and they stay the night. And in the morning, they wake, and together with the innkeeper, they're saying their morning prayers. When the officer of the mayor of the town enters, comes to the table near where they're praying, and raps 3 times on the table, and turns and leaves. The innkeeper doesn't respond, keeps on praying, and so the Baal Shem Tov, otherwise known as the Besht, and his disciples continue praying as well, but a little bit alarmed. The prayers are over, and the officer enters again, raps on the table 3 times, turns and leaves, at which time the Besht turns to the innkeeper and says, "What is going on? What is happening? What should we know?" And the innkeeper says, "Well, I am also the tax collector, and I am due to bring our share to the mayor by the end of the day. Otherwise, my family and I will go into captivity." And the Besht says, "Well, you should go now. You're such a wonderful host, but it's okay. Please go now." And the innkeeper says, "Oh, well, I can't go quite yet. I don't have a single pruta." And the Besht says, "Well, what are you going to do? What can we do to help you?" And he says, "It's okay. God will take care of me. Let's continue celebrating Shabbat. Let's have a good time." I'm sorry, it wasn't Shabbat, but they're celebrating. he says, I still have 3 hours yet. But a couple of hours go by, and the officer enters again, one more time, bangs 3 times on the table, and leaves. And the innkeeper says, I'm going to get ready to go now. And the Baal Shem Tov, who's been with him the entire time, says, but you still don't have a single pruta. How can you go? And the innkeeper says, probably God will take care of things. And he leaves, and the Baal Shem Tov and his disciples stand on the porch, and they watch what's going to happen. And as he gets on the road, they see that their host runs into somebody on a cart who gets out of the cart. The two of them speak, and there's some kind of exchange. And the traveler continues toward the inn, and the innkeeper goes on his way to do his errand. Well, of course, as the traveler arrives at the porch, all the disciples gather round. What has happened? Who are you? And what was that business that you just did? And the traveler says, oh, well, I'm a customer of this inn, and I had bought some brandy, very special, but I had not paid for it. And I realized over the past several days that I had better come and pay because the innkeeper had been so steadfast and had not come after me and had really done right by me. So the story ends with the Baal Shem Tov turning to his disciples and saying, see, have faith, act with integrity and honesty, and all will be well. So, I figured I would come here, I would tell you, if we would just have faith, and if we act honestly, everything will go right. But no, I thought, maybe that's not all we need. And that's not to belittle faith or integrity, right? Nor their actual power, right? We know that they actually do make a difference. But we also know that we need something more, and the story must be giving us something more than that, right? So, of course, let's look closer. What is Agnon giving us in this story? He's giving us, yes, faith and honesty, but also a picture of the situation of the innkeeper, who, of course, represents the Jews altogether, right? And their vulnerability, both from the top and the bottom of the social and economic hierarchy. Right? And it's this that we understand is actually the essence of anti-Semitism, is to be placed in that middle position, in that vulnerability. So let me catch up to where I was. Sometimes people claim that our cultural difference is the source of anti-Semitism. Well, we should always remember that is always an excuse and never the real reason for anti-Semitism. Similarly, all kinds of things that can be said about different groups that make them different or that might be true, those are not the reason for anyone's oppression. They may be a true fact about a person or a group, but they are not the reason that people as an entire group are mistreated or generalized about. When we're in the midst of both threats and real attacks, as we are now, it can be hard to remember that anti-Semitism is fundamentally a trick to use Jews as a scapegoat or a decoy. In other words, it is fundamentally aimed not only at Jews, but at sowing division among the majority of people. That is the actual purpose of anti-Semitism. It's hard to remember because it looks like we are the target, and we are, but there is a bigger thing going on always when you have a rise in anti-Semitism like we have now. Look at the division being sown now over the war in Israel-Palestine. Division among communities and individuals. Organizations whose goals are to improve our world. Educators, environmental organizations, all the groups whose goals are to make our world more just. We are seeing reports of the ways in which people in our country are taking one side, unable to hold the humanity of the other side. so that you have division among people who have previously been united. This combination of anti-Semitism and racism causes that dynamic that pressures people to pick one side, and this preoccupation helps to mask much bigger forces who actually have an interest in conflicts, in particular in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, continuing. And when we keep our minds only on whether things are the fault of one of those two parties, that preoccupies the conversation and takes the camera off of people who benefit from that. And I will go further into that, and we'll have a chance to talk back and forth when I'm not the only one talking into more detail. But I actually think of it as almost a spiritual practice to remember each time I'm talking about anti-Semitism to step back and refuse to be drawn into a one side or the other. And it isn't easy, even when we know that it doesn't really work that way. So, given all of this, what can we do about anti-Semitism? As I said, one important practice is just to repeatedly remind ourselves anti-Semitism doesn't stand alone. It isn't separate from the systems that create racism or classism or all the other ways that people are kept down. And anti-Semitism, similarly, won't be extracted from our culture by itself. So it is important to have programs and policies that address anti-Semitism, but in the end, we need to have programs and policies and education that address the whole picture together. What needs to happen? People need to know us. Right? Just like, I'll tell a story. Many of you know my son Sam. He's a student at UC Davis, and during spring break just a couple weeks ago, he brought home a new friend who stayed overnight with us. His name is Hongqi. He's from China, and he's been in this country for just a year and a half or so. And we had a really incredible experience getting to know each other. He's a person who speaks his mind very easily, and at first I thought it was just his learning the language, that he would work really hard at saying things, and then I realized I was getting access to so much of this incredible person's thinking. It wasn't just the way he spoke the language, but just his personality as someone who shared what was on his mind. And I had the beautiful opportunity to spend a couple of hours with him just myself when I was taking him back to Davis, actually to the train. Sam had to go somewhere else. So we had this time together, and then in the very last 1 minute that we had together, I said, Hongqi, I'm so happy that you came to visit. I hope you'll come again. It's wonderful starting to know you. And he blurted out, I'm so happy that I got to know Sam and I came to see you. Sam is the first Jewish person I've ever met. And I had heard a lot of bad things about Jews, but now I know they're not true. And he got out of the car and went to the train. And I sat sort of open-mouthed in the car. Sometimes these things happen. Not often do people tell you that that's what just happened. People need to know us. It is somewhat incredible to think that in a country with so few Jews, like China, you have anti-Semitism, but we know that you do, right? Because it isn't so much about us as about having a decoy. In January, I had the honor of spending time with a group of rabbis and a beloved Israeli scholar, Malila Elner Eshed, who came from Jerusalem to teach us and spend time with us. In sharing her experiences since October 11th with us, she really avoided pretense, and she said to us honestly, we are in darkness, and it may last a long time. but she also shared incredible new poetry from Israelis, full of anguish, courage, and insight, with perspectives that have the potential to help us all over time to heal and to build a future beyond the entrenched violence and polarization. If Israelis can write poetry like that, I thought to myself, I can open my mind to the possibility of creative responses to the things we are seeing and so upset by, and not only to responses that we've seen before. She also spoke of a group of Israelis that she's been gathering since October 11th to grieve together. And what she said was that this grieving was so important to her own holding on to her humanity, that there was actually a great deal of pressure not to grieve, but to move on immediately into the next steps, and that they really had to fight for themselves to prioritize gathering people to notice what had happened on October 7th. And she spoke of a second group of Israelis and Palestinians that she helps to gather, that has been gathering for years. And instead of giving up, they increased their monthly meetings to more often. And they meet on Zoom because the Palestinians cannot get to where they meet. And again, I thought, if they can do it, and they don't all agree. She said, we meet and we listen to each other. That doesn't mean we're all always aligned. To the contrary. If they can do it, how can we refuse to sit in a room with people who take a position that we don't share? How can we be stopping talking with organizations or people who we don't think get it, and they don't think we get it? And when I say we, I don't assume that we all have the same thought at all times, or even that a given one of us has the same thought on every day. But how can we cut each other off at the very times when we need people to know us and how things are impacting us, and we need to know other people and how they are impacted? So when I think about what needs to happen, the kind of cultural change we want has to include that kind of relationship building and maintaining, and thinking about who would benefit from hearing from me. Who could I ask to tell me about what they think or what they feel? Who might be willing to listen also? And second, we do need policies and laws and organized models of what should and shouldn't be, right? But those will not, again, those won't stand alone. They won't only be about anti-Semitism. When will we have no more anti-Semitism? When we have a world that is not looking for a scapegoat. When we have, and I don't mean a perfect world, but when we have leadership and people's needs being met so that people are not so vulnerable to accepting a scapegoat. And that is also a world where there is more equality and where we've addressed the other ways that people are slandered and dehumanized. And while that is a tall order, I think it's honest and true for us to face that, and then to just decide what's our next step in being part of it. So I want to end just by saying I do really think that we, as we turn to our own resources as Jews and to our communities, we have so much to give. And even in every blessing we said tonight, every time we said Baruch, every time we bent our knees, because as you might know, Baruch comes from that same word as our knees, our berkaim. Right? We have taken the kind of stance that you take in a martial art or in any sport where you want to be ready and hard to knock over. How can we become hard to knock over? By bending our knees a little bit, by being strong and flexible rather than rigid and inflexible. And when we can become strong and flexible, we are ready for the blessing of knowing that we are not alone, that we are connected to each other, we're connected to our allies, we are connected to people who would like to be our allies if we can let them know how. And we can keep coming back to that blessing, to that Baruch. Shabbat Shalom.